paper means nothing.
You came here for salvation, and I am claiming my price. You belong to me now.
The air in the penthouse office was so cold it felt like breathing in shards of glass. Or maybe that was just the look in his eyes. Cale Marcello didn't sit behind his obsidian desk. He inhabited the space around it. A predator carved from shadow and expensive suit fabric. He hadn't offered me a seat. I stood on the pristine white rug, feeling like a smudge of dirt, my cheap heels sinking into the plush pile. This was the wolf's den. I'd walked in willingly, my future a crumbling cliff edge. And he was the only one who could stop the fall. "You have 5 minutes, Miss Valerie," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floor and into my bones. He didn't look at the file I'd sent ahead, the one detailing my family's desperate, failing business, the one that proved we were drowning in debts not even our name could cover anymore. He looked at me, his gaze a physical dissection. "Explain to me why I should not let the vultures pick your family clean. Sentiment is a currency I do not deal in." I swallowed, my throat sandpaper dry. My father's words echoed in my head. "He's a shark, Alara, but he's the only one with a big enough tank to save us. Make him see the value. It's not about sentiment." "Mr. Marcello," I began, forcing my voice to stay level, a feat considering my knees were trembling. "It's about opportunity. The Valeri name might be financially compromised, but it still holds weight in this city. Social weight, a history of legitimacy that your enterprises lack." I was dancing on the edge of insult, and we both knew it. His lip curled, a faint, cruel gesture. "Legitimacy is a pretty word for a gilded cage. It doesn't stop bullets." "No," I agreed, meeting his stormy gray eyes. "But it opens doors that money and fear cannot. Doors to old families, to political circles, to international trade agreements that are currently closed to you. My father is still on the Harbor Trust's board. I have invitations to galas you'll never receive. We can be your key." He was silent for a long moment, his fingers steepled under his chin. The silence was a weapon, designed to make me break, to babble, to offer more. I held my ground, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I was bargaining with the devil, and he was deciding if my soul was worth the price. "A key," he repeated, the word a soft, dangerous mockery. He finally leaned forward, picking up the single sheet of paper that summarized my plea. "You want a loan, a significant one, with no collateral but a name and a promise of access." "It's not a loan," I corrected him, the words tasting like ash. This was the part I'd rehearsed, the part that made my skin crawl. "It's an investment, a partnership. You save Valeri Holdings, and in return, you get a seat at every table we sit at. You get our name to launder your reputation." He actually laughed then, a short, harsh sound that held no humor. "You think I need your family's tarnished silver to polish my image? I have a city in my pocket, little bird. I don't need an invitation. I own the building." The condescension was a slap. Little bird. I was the head of a multi-million-dollar corporation, crumbling or not. And he reduced me to a fragile, flighty thing. Anger, hot and sharp, cut through my fear. "Then why did you agree to see me?" I shot back, my composure cracking. "If we're so insignificant, why waste 5 minutes of your precious time?" His eyes narrowed, the amusement vanishing, replaced by a chilling intensity. He stood up, moving around the desk with a predator's grace. He was taller than I'd realized, his presence sucking the air from the room. He stopped mere inches from me, and I had to tilt my head back to hold his gaze. The scent of him, sandalwood and cold, clean power, wrapped around me. "I agreed to see you," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "because I was curious. I wanted to see what kind of creature walks into the lion's cage and asks for a favor." He reached out, not touching me, but his hand hovered near my cheek, close enough that I could feel the heat of his skin. I flinched, and a flicker of something dark and satisfied crossed his face. "You're desperate, and prideful, and terrified. It's a fascinating combination." I stood my ground, my fists clenched at my sides. "Are you going to help us or not?" He didn't answer directly. His gaze swept over me, from my carefully styled hair to my off-the-rack business suit, taking in every detail of my calculated presentation. "You're offering me business connections," he mused, as if talking to himself. "But business is transactional. It's cold, it lacks commitment." A cold dread began to pool in my stomach. This was veering off script. "What are you saying?" He finally lowered his hand, but his eyes remained locked on mine, pinning me in place. "I'm saying your proposal is insufficient. A name is not enough. A seat on a board is not enough. He took a half step closer, and I could see the flecks of silver in his irises, like chips of ice. If you want my protection, if you want my money to flow into your family's empty coffers and make the wolves retreat, I require a more tangible guarantee. My breath hitched. What guarantee? The words were a whisper. A cruel, calculating smile touched his lips, the first tangible expression I'd seen on his face. It transformed him from a cold statue into something alive and terrifying. You, he said. The single word hung in the sterile air, simple and devastating. Me? I echoed, my mind refusing to process it. You will come and work for me. Personally, you will be my liaison to this new world of legitimacy you promise. You will be at my side, in my office, in my home. You will be the living, breathing symbol of our partnership. He made the word sound like a shackle. You're asking me to be a hostage, I breathed, horror washing over me. I'm asking you to be my salvation, he corrected, his tone utterly serious now, all mockery gone. You think I need my reputation laundered? Perhaps you're right, but not in the way you think. I need a conscience, a visible, undeniable link to the world of light. You will be that link. You will be the proof that Cale Martello is more than just a thug in a suit, that he can be civilized. He said the word as if it were a foreign, distasteful concept. And in return, your family's debts are erased. Your company is funded. Your name is protected by my name. It's a simple trade, Alara. Your freedom for theirs. The world tilted. This wasn't a business deal. It was a Faustian bargain. He wasn't just buying influence. He was buying a piece of a soul, a piece of my soul, to use as a shield. He was claiming me, my independence, my life, traded for my family's survival. I wanted to refuse, to spit in his face, to turn and walk out, and take my chances with the financial vultures. But I saw my father's exhausted face. I saw my mother's quiet despair. I saw the lifetime of work, of history, that would be ground into dust. I was the key, and he knew it. He saw the war in my eyes, the struggle between self-preservation and duty. He saw the moment I broke. His smile widened, a victor's smile. Do we have an agreement? He asked, though it wasn't a question. It was a sentence. I closed my eyes for a brief second, shutting out his triumphant face, shutting out the beautiful, terrible prison of his office. When I opened them, my voice was flat, all emotion leached out. We have an agreement. Good, he said, turning his back on me as if I were already a piece of furniture he'd acquired. He walked back to his desk. Be here tomorrow at 8. We have a charity gala to attend. You'll need a new dress. Something expensive. You're representing me now. He didn't look at me again. The audience was over. I had sold myself to the wolf to save the flock, and he had already begun to build his cage. I turned and walked out on unsteady legs, the door clicking shut behind me with the finality of a tomb ceiling. My old life was over. The silence in the elevator was a physical pressure, a stark contrast to the roaring in my ears. I leaned against the cool metal wall, my legs threatening to give way. You. I would like to have you. The words echoed, a death knell for the life I had known. I had walked in as Alara Valeri, sign of a failing empire. I was leaving as Cale Martello's property, his salvation. The irony was so bitter it made me want to laugh or maybe scream. The city outside the sleek glass tower was a blur of noise and light. A world continuing on, oblivious to the pact I had just made with its shadow king. My driver, a man named Arthur who had been with my family for 20 years, gave me a concerned look in the rearview mirror. Everything all right, Miss Alara? Just drive, Arthur, please. My voice sounded hollow, someone else's. I couldn't go home. Not yet. I couldn't face my father's hopeful eyes, my mother's quiet anxiety. I had the salvation they so desperately needed, but I couldn't tell them the cost. Not yet. I directed Arthur to the waterfront, to a quiet, windswept pier, where Leo and I used to go when we were teenagers, dreaming of futures that didn't involve collapsing family. Legacies. Leo, my brother. The one who should have been here, bearing this weight. But Leo was gone, lost to a different kind of darkness, and I was the only one left to hold up the crumbling walls. The wind off the water was cold, whipping my hair around my face. I gripped the rusty railing, the metal rough under my palms, and stared at the churning gray water. Cale Marcello's face swam in my vision, the sharp planes, the pitiless eyes, the cruel curve of his mouth. He hadn't just made a business proposition. He had issued a conquest. He saw my desperation, my pride, and he had systematically dismantled both, reducing me to a commodity, a visible, undeniable link to the world of light, a conscience. He wanted to use my family's respectability as a cloak for his monstrosity, and he wanted me to stand beside him and smile while he did it. A hot tear escaped, quickly chilled by the wind. What had I done? I had traded my autonomy for a checkbook. I had agreed to become an ornament in the court of a tyrant. The thought of being near him, of having to listen to him, to obey him, sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. He was rude, arrogant, and he held the power of life and death over my family. It was a combination designed to break me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. My father. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, a text lit up the screen. "Any news, sweetheart?" "The creditors are calling again." The pressure was a vice around my lungs. There was no choice. There had never been a choice. I had to do this, for them. When I finally returned home, the grand old house felt like a mausoleum. The air was thick with the scent of lemon polish and quiet despair. My father was in his study. The ledgers spread before him, his face pale and drawn. He looked up as I entered, his eyes full of a fragile hope that shattered my heart. "Alara, well, what did he say?" I forced a smile, one that felt like a crack in porcelain. "He agreed, Papa. He's going to help us." The relief that washed over his face was so profound it was almost painful to witness. He stood up, rounding the desk to pull me into a hug. "I knew it. I knew you could do it. Oh, my clever girl. You've saved us. You've saved everything." I buried my face in his shoulder, inhaling the familiar scent of his cologne, trying to draw strength from it. He had no idea what he was thanking me for. "There are conditions," I murmured into his jacket. He pulled back, holding me at arm's length, his smile only slightly dimmed. Of course. Strict terms, I'm sure. Interest rates. He's a businessman after all. We can handle it. Whatever it is, we can handle it now." How could I tell him? How could I explain that the condition was me? That his daughter was the collateral? I couldn't, not yet. The shame, the humiliation was a fire in my chest. "It's a partnership," I said, carefully extracting the truth. "He wants a more hands-on role. I'll be liaising with him directly. It might mean long hours, being at his offices, attending his events." My father's brow furrowed slightly, but the overwhelming relief overshadowed his concern. "If that's what it takes. We owe him a great debt, Alara. We must be accommodating. This is our second chance. Our second chance. My life sentence." The next morning, I dressed with a sense of grim finality. I chose a severe black dress, armor for the day ahead. Arthur drove me back to the glass tower. The journey felt like a trip to the gallows. The receptionist in the gleaming lobby didn't even ask my name. She smiled and directed me to the private elevator. "Mr. Marcello is expecting you." The elevator rose, my stomach dropping with it. When the doors opened into his penthouse, he was there, waiting. He was dressed in another impeccably tailored suit, a dark charcoal today. He held a cup of black coffee and looked me over with a critical, appraising eye. "Punctual." "Good," he said, his tone devoid of warmth. He gestured to a garment bag draped over a nearby chair. "Your dress for tonight. The gala begins at 8. Be ready by 7:30. My driver will collect you." He spoke in commands. There was no please or thank you. I was already an employee, a subordinate. "What are my duties today?" I asked, my voice tight. "Today, you observe," he said, turning and walking towards his office. "You learn how I work. You learn what I represent. You will sit in on my meetings. You will not speak unless spoken to. Your job is to watch, and to understand the power that now protects your family." He led me into his office, the same room where my fate had been sealed. He didn't offer me a seat. I stood near the window, a silent spectator as his day began. It was a parade of hardened men, of whispered conversations, of deals made with a handshake and a veiled threat. I saw the respect he commanded, the fear he inspired. He was a king holding court, and his kingdom was built on a foundation of intimidation and violence, glossed over by wealth and power. He was ruthless. He dismissed a man pleading for more time on a debt with a flick of his wrist. He coolly authorized an action that made my blood run cold, his voice never rising above a conversational tone. Through it all, he occasionally glanced at me, his eyes checking for a reaction, for fear, for disgust. I kept my face a careful, neutral mask, even as my insides twisted into knots. During a lull, he gestured to a folder on his desk. "The final transfer documents for Valeri Holdings. The debt was cleared 10 minutes ago. Your family is safe. The words should have been a liberation. Instead, they felt like the click of a lock. The deal was done. I was truly his. I finally found my voice, though it was barely a whisper. "Thank you." He looked at me, a strange, unreadable expression in his gray eyes. "Don't thank me, Alara," he said, his voice low. "You haven't yet begun to pay the price." The rest of the day was a blur of silent observation and simmering dread. When I returned home that afternoon, the atmosphere in the house was transformed. My father was on the phone, his voice booming with confidence again. My mother was humming in the kitchen. The storm clouds had lifted. They were free, and I had never felt more trapped. I went upstairs to my room and unzipped the garment bag. Inside was a dress of liquid silver, breathtakingly beautiful and obscenely expensive. It was a costume for my new role. As I held it up against myself, staring at my reflection in the mirror, I didn't see a savior. I saw a sacrifice, dressed in chains of silk and sequins. The wolf had claimed his salvation, and tonight, I had to walk by his side and make the world believe I wanted to be there. The silver dress was a second skin of cold fire. It clung to every curve, a masterpiece of design that felt more like a brand than clothing. Standing before the full-length mirror in my bedroom, I barely recognized the woman staring back. The severe professional Ilara was gone, replaced by a glittering ornament, polished and presented for the wolf's pleasure. My reflection seemed to mock me. This was the salvation I had become. A beautiful, silent prop. Arthur drove me to the museum where the gala was being held. His usual cheerful chatter replaced by a tense silence. He knew, he had to know. The shift in the family's fortunes was too sudden, too tied to my daily pilgrimages to Cale Marcello's tower. He pulled up to the red carpet, a river of light and flashbulbs, and gave me a look that was part pity, part awe. "Good luck, Miss Alara." Stepping out of the car was like stepping onto a stage. The night air was cool, but the heat from the cameras was intense. I forced a smile, my stomach a tight knot of anxiety, and then I saw him. He was waiting at the top of the steps, a dark monolith amidst the pastel and sequined crowd. He wasn't smiling. He was surveying his domain, his gaze sweeping over the city's elite with detached ownership. His eyes found me, and he gave a slight, imperceptible nod. As I climbed the steps, every eye felt like it was on me. Whispers slithered through the air like snakes. "Is that Alara Valeri? With Cale Marcello? I thought her family was finished. What is she doing with him?" I reached his side, the scent of his sandalwood cologne enveloping me. He didn't offer his arm. He turned, and I fell into step beside him, a planet pulled into the orbit of a dark star. "You look adequate," he murmured, his voice for my ears only. The backhanded compliment was a deliberate sting. "Remember why you're here. Smile. Nod. Looks like you belong at my side." And so the performance began. We moved through the glittering crowd, and it was like watching the Red Sea part. People vied for his attention, their smiles too wide, their laughter too loud. They were terrified of him, and they worshipped him for it. He was polite, chillingly so, his manners a sharp, precise weapon. He introduced me simply as Alara Valeri, and the way he said my name, with a possessiveness that was both subtle and absolute, left no room for questions. I played my part. I smiled. I made inane conversation about art and charity with people whose eyes kept darting to Cale, seeking his approval. I was the human shield, the living proof of his civility. And it was working. I saw the calculating looks, the reassessments. If Cale Marcello has a Valeri on his arm, he must be changing. He must be going legitimate. It was a lie, a beautiful, glittering lie, and I was its chief architect. During a lull, as we stood near a colossal ice sculpture that was slowly melting, he leaned close. "The mayor is coming over. He's been blocking my harbor expansion project for months. You will charm him." It wasn't a request. It was an order. My first real test. Mayor Henderson was a jovial man with a politician's handshake and wary eyes. "Cale, a magnificent event as always." His gaze slid to me. "And Miss Valerie, a surprise to see you here." "The pleasure is mine, Mayor Henderson," I said, my smile feeling like it was cracking my face. "My father speaks so highly of your work on the urban renewal project. He was saying the other day how a partnership with forward-thinking private enterprise could really accelerate that kind of initiative." I was weaving my family's credibility into Cale's agenda, just as he'd wanted. I saw the moment the mayor's interest was piqued, the way his political mind began to recalculate, the risks of opposing a man who now had the Valerie name in his pocket. Cale watched the exchange, saying little, a faint, approving smirk on his lips. When the mayor moved on, he leaned in again, his breath warm against my ear. "See? You are useful." The words were a violation. I was reduced to my utility, a tool. The anger that had been simmering all day boiled over, but I had no outlet. I was trapped in this gilded cage, forced to perform for my jailer. The worst moment came later. A man I recognized, Alexander Rostov, a rival whose businesses operated in the gray areas. Cale dominated, approached with a predatory smile. "Marcello, stepping up in the world I see." His eyes raked over me, lingering. "The Valeri girl, pretty. I heard her family was on the auction block. I suppose you got a reasonable price." Before I could even process the insult, Cale moved. It was so fast I almost missed it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. He took a half step forward, placing himself slightly in front of me, and looked at Rostov. He didn't speak a word, but the change in his posture, the sheer, lethal stillness that came over him, was more terrifying than any shout. The air around us went cold. Rostov's smirk vanished, replaced by a pallor of genuine fear. He took a step back, muttering a hasty apology before melting back into the crowd. Cale turned back to me, his expression unreadable. "No one speaks to what's mine in that manner," he said quietly, his gray eyes holding mine. "What's mine?" The words should have felt like a further imprisonment. But in that moment, surrounded by sharks, his brutal, unhesitating protection sent a confusing, unwelcome jolt through me. It wasn't kindness. It was possession. But in this world of wolves, being possessed by the most powerful one offered a perverse, terrifying safety. The rest of the night was a haze of forced smiles and quiet despair. When we finally left, the silence in the back of his Rolls-Royce was heavier than any conversation. I stared out the window, my reflection in the glass superimposed. Over the passing city, a ghost in a silver dress. "You performed well tonight," he said, breaking the silence. His tone was matter-of-fact, like a general debriefing a soldier. I didn't look at him. "I did what I had to do. That is all I require," he replied. He didn't take me home. The car pulled into the underground garage of his tower. I looked at him, a question in my eyes. "Your duties are not confined to public hours," he stated. "You have a room here. It's more efficient. A room, a cell in his sky-high fortress." The cage was becoming more literal. Wordlessly, I followed him into the elevator and up to the penthouse. He led me down a hallway to a room. That was the mirror image of his own in its minimalist. Luxury, a bed, a wardrobe, a breathtaking view of the city. It was sterile and impersonal. There were no personal touches because I wasn't a person here. I was an asset in residence. "We meet with the Harbor Trust Board at 9 tomorrow. Be ready," he said from the doorway. Then he was gone, closing the door behind him. I stood in the center of the room, the silver dress suddenly feeling like a lead weight. I walked to the window, placing my palms against the cool glass. Down below, the city lights twinkled, each one a life, a story. My story had been hijacked. I was living a lie, playing a role in a story written by Cale Marcello. He had claimed me as his salvation, but as I stood there in the silent, opulent prison, I wondered if any part of me would survive the price of his redemption. The knock at my door at 7 the next morning was as firm and impersonal as everything else in this place. It was a woman, severe in a black suit, her hair pulled into a tight bun. She introduced herself as Anya, my new stylist and coordinator. She didn't ask what I wanted to wear. She presented a selection of outfits chosen by someone else, Cale, no doubt, all of them projecting an image of powerful, unapproachable elegance. I was being curated. My armor was being chosen for me. Breakfast was a silent affair in the vast, sterile dining area. Cale was already there, reading a financial tablet, a half-empty espresso cup beside him. He didn't look up as I sat down. A plate of fruit and a croissant were placed in front of me. I ate because I knew I needed the fuel, not because I was hungry. The food tasted like nothing. "The trust board," he said, finally setting his tablet down. "They are old money, suspicious of change. They respect your father, but they fear me. Your job is to bridge that gap, to be the familiar face that makes my presence palatable. You will speak about the synergies of a partnership. You will not mention my name unless necessary. You are the Valeri in the room. Emphasize that. Again, the instructions, the strategy. I was a chess piece and he was moving me across the board. I understand." The meeting was held in a wood-paneled boardroom that smelled of old books and Older power, 8 men and 2 women, all with the patina of inherited wealth and influence, watched us enter. I saw the immediate tension, the way their spines straightened at the sight of Kyle. He was a wolf who had wandered into a flock of particularly well-bred sheep. I took my seat beside him, my heart a frantic bird against my ribs. I followed his script. I spoke of my family's long history with the trust, of my father's vision for sustainable growth, of the stability a strong private partner could bring. I was calm and articulate, using my name like a key, watching it unlock the guarded expressions around the table. I was the Trojan horse, and Kale was the army hidden inside my belly. He said very little. He let me do the work, his silent presence a constant, unspoken threat. When the chairman, Sterling, raised concerns about reputational risk, Kale finally spoke. "Reputation is a matter of perception, Charles," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "Ilara's presence here should reassure you. The Valeri name is a testament to stability and integrity. I am merely the capital and the drive to help that legacy grow." He gestured to me, as if presenting Exhibit A. It was brilliantly manipulative. He was using my family's goodness to whitewash his own darkness, and I was helping him do it. The board was swayed. I could see it in their nodding heads, their relaxed postures. By the end of the 2-hour meeting, we had a provisional agreement. We had won. Back in the car, Kale was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to me. "You were effective." It was the closest I would ever come to his praise. The words should have felt like a victory. Instead, they felt like a confirmation of my corruption. I had been effective at selling my soul. The days fell into a grim rhythm. I was woken by Anya, dressed in clothes I didn't choose, fed a breakfast I didn't taste, and then thrust into a series of meetings and appearances as Kale's liaison. I was his key to the city's inner sanctums. I opened doors to private clubs, to exclusive charity committees, to political fundraisers. Everywhere we went, the pattern was the same. Initial fear and suspicion at the sight of him, followed by cautious acceptance once I, the respectable Valerie heiress, smoothed the way. I was living in a gilded nightmare. By day, I was the polished, articulate face of his legitimacy campaign. By night, I was a prisoner in his sky-high apartment, listening to the silence, staring at the city lights that represented a freedom I could no longer touch. I saw my family occasionally, for carefully orchestrated dinners. They were thriving. The color was back in my father's cheeks. The worry was gone from my mother's eyes. They showered me with gratitude, believing I was a brilliant businesswoman who had secured a powerful ally. Their happiness was my prison bars. And through it all, there was Kale. He was never cruel, not in the way I expected. He was absolute. He was demanding, critical, and emotionally barren. He spoke in commands and assessments. He watched me constantly, his gray eyes missing nothing, analyzing my every reaction, my every flicker of emotion. He was studying me, learning what made me tick, what made me worthwhile. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of back-to-back meetings, I was in my room, too mentally exhausted to even change out of my suit. There was a soft knock. It was him. He held 2 glasses of whiskey. "You look like you need this," he said, offering one to me. I was so surprised I took it. He walked over to my window, looking out at the same view I spent my night staring at. "You are wondering how long this will last," he said, not looking at me. It wasn't a question. "I'm wondering when I stop feeling like I'm drowning," I replied. The honesty pulled from me by exhaustion and the strong alcohol. He took a sip of his whiskey. "You're not drowning. You're adapting. You're stronger than you think you are. I knew that the moment you walked into my office and tried to negotiate with me. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a surrender." He turned then, his gaze sharp. "Was it? You got what you wanted. Your family is safe. Your name is secure. You didn't like the price." He took a step closer. "This world, the one of old money and legitimacy you're so fond of, it has its own knives, Ilara. They're just silver-plated and hidden behind smiles. My knives are honest. You know they exist. You know what they can do. Is that supposed to be a comfort?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and a strange, unwanted fascination. "It's a fact," he said. "You're learning to navigate a more dangerous world. That should be a comfort. It means you're surviving." He finished his drink and set the glass down on my desk. "We have the opera tomorrow night. It's a long one. Get some rest." He left, closing the door behind him. I stood there, the glass of whiskey untouched in my hand, his words echoing in the silence. "You're surviving." He was right, I was. But at what cost? I was becoming a polished, hollow version of myself, a tool for a man who saw people as instruments. And the most terrifying part was that a small, hidden part of me was starting to understand his brutal, uncompromising logic. I was learning from the wolf, and I was afraid of what I was becoming. The opera was another battlefield. It wasn't about music. It was about being seen. We sat in the Marcello family box, a gilded cage suspended above the typical crowd. I wore emerald green silk, another costume from my ever-growing, carefully controlled wardrobe. Cale was a dark presence beside me, his attention not on the tragic heroine on stage, but on the audience below. He was scanning the faces, noting who was there, who was with whom, calculating alliances and slights. I was doing the same now, a habit I'd unconsciously picked up. I saw the furtive glances aimed at our box, the whispered conversations behind gloved hands, the Valeri girl and the Marcello king. What does it mean? At the intermission, we moved through the opulent foyer, a sea of champagne and jewels. Cale's hand was alight, proprietary pressure on the small of my back, guiding me, claiming me. We were approached by a couple, the Van Horns, old family friends of my parents. Mrs. Van Horn embraced me, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Elara, darling, you look stunning, and Mr. Marcello, what a surprise." Her gaze darted between us, brimming with unasked questions. "Eleanor," I said, my smile practiced and perfect. "The performance is breathtaking. Cale is a devoted patron of the arts." The lie slipped out smoothly, a well-rehearsed line. I was becoming very good at this. Cale exchanged a few polite, chillingly formal words with Mr. Van Horn about the city's symphony orchestra. I stood there, the human bridge, my presence making the impossible conversation flow. When they moved away, I heard Mrs. Van Horn's hushed whisper to her husband. "I just don't understand it. What is she doing with him?" What was I doing? I was erasing the line between my world and his. And with every passing day, the line became fainter. Later that week, the illusion was violently shattered. We were in his office, reviewing contracts for a new shipping venture, when Cale's phone buzzed with a specific, insistent tone I'd come to recognize. It was the sound of his other life, the one that existed in the shadows. His expression didn't change, but the air in the room did. It went cold and sharp. He listened for a moment, then said, "Handle it." He hung up and looked at me. "There's been a problem. A competitor is being obstinate. We need to pay him a visit." A visit. I knew what that meant. My blood ran cold. "I'll wait here," I said, my voice tight. "No," he said, standing up and grabbing his jacket. "You're coming. You need to see this. You need to understand the reality of the power that protects you." Protest died in my throat. This wasn't a negotiation. It was another lesson. A brutal one. We drove to the industrial docks, the landscape shifting from glass and steel to rust and chain-link fences. The SUV stopped in front of a warehouse that smelled of fish and diesel fuel. Cale got out and I followed, my heart hammering. Inside, the scene was starkly lit by a single hanging bulb. A man was on his knees, his face bruised and bleeding. Two of Kyle's men stood over him, their faces impassive. This was the obstinate competitor. Cale walked forward, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. He didn't look at me. He focused entirely on the man on the floor. "I gave you a choice, Benito," Kyle said, his voice calm, conversational. "You could be a part of my operation, or you could move your business. You chose to try to undercut me. That was a mistake." The man Benito spat blood onto the concrete. "Go to hell, Marcello." Cale sighed, as if dealing with a stubborn child. He nodded to one of his men. The man stepped forward and with brutal efficiency broke Benito's arm. The sound of the crack was sickening, followed by a guttural scream of agony. I flinched, my hand flying to my mouth. I felt the bile rise in my throat. This was the truth. This was the unvarnished violence that underpinned the beautiful lies I helped him spin. The opera, the galas, the boardrooms, they were just the pretty surface. This was the rotten foundation. Cale turned and looked at me then. His eyes were cold, devoid of any emotion. He was watching my reaction, testing me. "This is what it takes," he said, his voice cutting through Benito's moans. "This is the language they understand. Sentiment gets people killed. Mercy is a weakness." I couldn't speak. I could only stare, horrified, at the scene of casual brutality. This was the man I stood beside. This was the power I was leveraging to save my family. He walked back to me, leaving Benito whimpering on the floor. "Now you see," he said quietly, taking my elbow and steering me back towards the car. My legs were weak, threatening to buckle. "The world you come from pretends this doesn't exist. My world acknowledges it, embraces it. Your family's safety and your comfortable life are paid for with moments like this. Remember that the next time you feel sorry for yourself, wear a new dress." The ride back to the tower was conducted in a silence more profound than any we had shared before. I was shaking. The image of the broken man seared into my mind. I felt dirty, complicit. I had seen the engine room of the beautiful ship I was sailing on, and it was a place of blood and pain. When we reached the penthouse, I went straight to my room and vomited into the toilet. I scrubbed my hands, but I couldn't wash away the feeling of contamination. I had thought I was paying a price with my freedom, my dignity. I now realized the price was also my soul. I was becoming numb to horror. He had forced me to look into the abyss, and the abyss had stared back. And the most terrifying part was that his words echoed in my head, a dark, twisted logic I couldn't escape. This is what it takes. For the first time, I truly understood the monster I had bound myself to, and I was terrified that a part of me was starting to understand him. The days after the docks were shrouded in a grim new understanding. The polished surfaces of the penthouse, the tailored clothes, the exquisite food. It all felt like a thin veneer over something festering and brutal. I moved through my duties like an automaton, my smile at fundraisers a brittle mask. Every hand I shook, I saw Benito's broken arm. In every polite conversation, I heard his scream. Cale had succeeded in his lesson. I could no longer pretend. He seemed to sense the shift in me. His scrutiny intensified, but the cold mockery was gone, replaced by a quiet, analytical observation. He was waiting to see if I would break, if the sight of his true nature would shatter the useful tool he had crafted. A week later, the test came from an unexpected direction. My brother Leo. I was in the penthouse library, attempting to read a report when my personal phone buzzed. It was a number I hadn't seen in months. Leo. My charming, reckless, perpetually in trouble younger brother. A knot of dread immediately tightened in my stomach. "Ilara, thank God." His voice was a frantic whisper, crackling with panic. "I'm in deep. Really deep this time." "What have you done, Leo?" I asked, my voice weary. It was always something. Gambling debts, bad business deals. My family's financial salvation hadn't magically cured his self-destructive tendencies. The wrong people. I borrowed money. A lot of it. From a guy named Rostov. The name was a punch to the gut. Alexander Rostov. The man from the gala. The one Cal had silenced with a look. "You idiot, Leo," I hissed, my heart plummeting. "Do you have any idea who that is?" "I do now. They're saying I owe them triple. They're talking about taking fingers, Ilara." "You have to help me. You're with Marcello now. You have to talk to him. He can make this go away." The irony was so thick it choked me. I had sold myself to one monster to save my family from financial ruin. And now my brother was demanding. I used that monster's power to save him from another. I was caught in a web of my own making. I can't just ask him for a favor like that. "Leo, you don't understand what it would cost." The cost would be me. Even more indebted, even more owned. "It's me, Ilara. Your brother." "Are you going to let them cut me up?" His voice broke into a sob. "Please." I ended the call, my hands trembling. I had no choice. I had to go to Cale. I found him in his office, reviewing security footage on his tablet. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. "I need to ask you for something," I said, the words tasting like ash. One eyebrow lifted slightly. "Oh?" "It's my brother, Leo. He's gotten himself into trouble. He owes money to Alexander Rostov, a significant amount. They're threatening him." Cale leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. The silence stretched, taut and dangerous. "Rostov," he repeated. "This is not a business matter. This is a personal mess. Cleaning up your brother's mistakes is not part of our arrangement." "I know," I whispered, my pride in tatters. "I am asking you personally." He studied me for a long moment, his gray eyes seeing right through to my terrified, humiliated core. "And what do you offer in return for this personal favor?" "You have already given me your public allegiance. What remains?" What remained? My soul felt like it was already his. I had nothing left to bargain with. I just stood there, silent and defeated. A slow, cruel smile touched his lips. "A lesson in power, then. You want me to fix your brother's problem? Fine, but you will watch. You will see how it's done. You will understand the full weight of the debt you are incurring." My blood ran cold. "Watch?" We're paying Rostov a visit, now. He stood up, his decision final. Consider it part of your ongoing education. This was different from the docks. That had been a shocking, brutal lesson. This was premeditated. This was me, actively asking him to unleash his violence on my behalf. The complicity was a stain spreading through me. We drove to a private, members-only club that was one of Rostov's known haunts. Kale didn't bother with stealth. He walked straight through the opulent lobby, past startled staff, and into a back room where Rostov was playing cards with 3 other men. The room went silent. Rostov looked up, his face initially annoyed, then paling dramatically when he saw Kale. He stood up so quickly, his chair scraped back. Marcello, to what do I owe the pleasure? Kyle ignored the other men. He walked right up to the table, his gaze fixed on Rostov. I understand you have a business arrangement with a Leo Valeri. Rostov's eyes darted to me, standing just inside the doorway. An understanding dawned in his face, followed by fear. A minor matter. A personal loan. The matter is no longer personal, Kale said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. It's mine. The debt is cleared. You will forget Leo Valeri's name. You will not look in his direction again. You will not even think of him. Do you understand? Rostov swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. Kale, the principal of the thing. The interest. Kale's hand moved faster than I could follow. He didn't hit Rostov. He picked up a heavy crystal ashtray from the table and, in one fluid motion, brought it down on Rostov's hand, which was splayed on the green felt. The sound of breaking bone was muffled but unmistakable. Rostov screamed, clutching his shattered hand to his chest. Kale leaned in close, his voice so quiet I almost couldn't hear it. The only principle here is my will. The only interest you should be concerned with is staying alive. Do we have an understanding now? Tears of pain and humiliation streamed down Rostov's face. He nodded frantically. Yes, understood. It's done. It's forgotten. Kale straightened up, his expression one of mild distaste, as if he'd just dealt with an unpleasant bit of trash. He turned and walked towards me, not even glancing back at the sobbing man. He stopped in front of me, his eyes searching mine. He was looking for the horror, the disgust, and it was there. A cold, sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. But beneath it, to my own shame, was something else. A dark, terrifying sense of relief. Leo was safe. The problem was gone. Erased with a swift, brutal act of power. Your brother's debt is cleared, Kale said softly. This is what my protection looks like, Alara. It is absolute. And it is expensive. He had done it. He had forced me to not only witness his violence, but to be the cause of it. I had asked and he had delivered. I was now irrevocably personally bound to him. I had stared into the abyss again. But this time, I hadn't just watched. I had participated. I had become a part of his dark world, not just an observer. And as I followed him out of the club, the sounds of Rostov's pain fading behind me, I knew I had crossed a line from which there was no return. The victory felt like a disease. Leo was safe. His debt vanished into the ether of Kale's will. But the cost was a rot in my own spirit. I had asked for violence and received it. I had stood by and watched a man's hand be broken to solve a problem my brother had created. The relief I felt was the most shameful part. It proved Kale right. In his world, this was how things were handled. It was efficient. It was final. And a part of me, the part that loved my brother, was deeply, appallingly grateful for that finality. Kale said nothing about it afterward. It was just another transaction, logged and filed away. But the dynamic between us had shifted. The forced formality eased into something more habitual. I was no longer just a hostage he was molding. I was an accomplice. He began to discuss things with me, not just order me. He'd run business strategies by me, asking for my legitimate world perspective. I found myself offering insights, my mind adapting to the brutal logic of his operations. I was learning to think like him, and the realization was a constant, low-grade horror. One evening we were working late in his office, the city a sprawl of diamonds below us. He was reviewing a proposal to acquire a rival's shipping lanes. It was a hostile takeover, predicated on threats I now understood were very real. He'll never agree to these terms, I said, looking over the documents. It's a total surrender. He will, Kale replied, not looking up. He has a daughter at university, a very bright girl, pre-med. The chill that went through me was familiar now. It was the chill of understanding. He wasn't just threatening the man. He was threatening his family, The man's love for his daughter was a lever Kyle would use to break him. It was monstrous, and it was effective. I should have been outraged. I should have condemned him. But instead I heard myself say, "Then you should sweeten the offer for the daughter. A scholarship fund. It makes the surrender look more like a negotiation. It's better for our public image." The words hung in the air between us. Our public image. Cale slowly lifted his head, his gaze locking with mine. There was no surprise in his eyes, only a deep, unsettling approval. "That's good," he said, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "That's very good, Alara, you're learning." The praise was a poison, and it warmed me from the inside. I had just helped him refine an act of extortion. I had made it more palatable, more insidious. I had become useful in the darkness, not just the light. I looked away, my cheeks burning with shame. What was happening to me? The lines were blurring. The wolf's den was starting to feel less like a prison and more like a home. A terrifying, brutal home, but a place where I had a role. A purpose where my mind was valued, even if it was for terrible things. Later that night, unable to sleep, I wandered out into the main living area. He was there, standing by the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He didn't turn around. "You can't sleep," he stated. "No, the mind rebels against its own corruption," he said, as if reading my thoughts. He took a sip. "It's a painful process. Is that what this is? Corruption?" He finally turned. The city lights silhouetted him. A dark king against his kingdom. It's adaptation. "You were a flower in a hothouse, Alara. Beautiful but fragile. I've transplanted you into the wild. You're growing thorns. It's a sign of strength." "Thorns hurt people," I whispered. "Thorns protect you," he countered, his voice low and intense. "They ensure you are not so easily picked. Your family's problem was that they had no thorns. They relied on the goodwill of a world that has none. I have given you yours. You should be thanking me." The arrogance was breathtaking. He saw himself as my benefactor, my dark liberator. And the most terrifying part was that a small, twisted part of me saw it too. The fear that had once been a constant companion was receding, replaced by a burgeoning, dangerous confidence. I was no longer just Alara Valeri, the victim. I was Alara Valeri who stood beside Cale Marcello, and that name carried a power I was beginning to crave. "I don't want to become like you," I said. But the protest sounded weak, even to my own ears. "You won't," he said, turning back to the window. "You'll be something else, something better. You'll have the ruthlessness you need to survive, but you'll retain the conscience that makes you valuable to me. That is the point of view, Alara. You are my salvation, remember? You keep me connected to the light, even as I walk in the dark." He said it with such conviction. He truly believed it. He had claimed me not just as a tool, but as a talisman, a charm against his own damnation. The weight of that responsibility was heavier than any chain. I went back to my room, his words echoing in the silence. "You are my salvation." He was reshaping me in his image, honing me into a weapon and calling it redemption. And as I lay in the dark, I was no longer sure whether I was fighting the transformation or, against all my morals and every instinct I once held dear, starting to embrace it. The cage was open, but I was no longer trying to fly away. I was learning to enjoy the view from the gilded bars. The gala for the city's new contemporary art museum was the pinnacle of Cale's campaign of legitimacy. It was his project, his name on the most significant donor plaque, and my presence by his side was the final, gleaming seal of approval. I wore a midnight blue dress, studded with tiny crystals that caught the light like scattered stars. It was armor and announcement all in one. I looked the part. More frighteningly, I was beginning to feel it. We moved through the crowd, a united front. The whispers were different now. Less "what is she doing with him?" and more "look at them together." It makes sense. I had become an accepted part of his landscape. I smiled, I charmed, I discussed art with critics and investments with bankers. I was no longer just bridging a gap. I was the living proof that the gap no longer existed. It was there I saw Julian, my ex-fiancé, the man I had been supposed to marry before my family's fortunes crumbled. Before he gently, regretfully, called off the engagement, citing irreconcilable pressures. He was standing with a group of people from his old money law firm, his handsome face a mask of stunned disbelief as he watched me on Cale's arm. Our eyes met across the room. A jolt, part old hurt, part newfound contempt went through me. Cale felt the subtle shift in my posture. His hand, resting on my back, pressed a little firmer, An acquaintance? He murmured, his voice a low rumble near my ear. A ghost, I replied, my voice steady. Julian excused himself from his group and made his way over. He looked from me to Cale, his smile strained. Alara, you look, well, Julian, I said, my tone coolly polite. This is Cale Marcello. Cale, Julian Thorne. Cale didn't offer his hand. He gave Julian a slow, assessing look that seemed to strip him down to his marrow. Thorne, he repeated, as if tasting something unpleasant. Of the Thorne Foundation. Your father sits on the harbor board. He votes no quite often. Julian paled slightly. I don't involve myself in my father's business. A wise policy, Cale said, his smile a razor's edge. It keeps one's hands clean. The implication was clear. Julian's hands were clean because he never dirtied them with real work, with absolute power. Julian floundered, his gaze returning to me, desperate to regain some footing. Alara, I heard about your family's recovery. I'm truly happy for you. It's a remarkable turnaround. Thank you, I said, my smile not reaching my eyes. Having the right partner makes all the difference. The barb hit its mark. Julian's face tightened. He had been the wrong partner. He had chosen his family's comfort over mine. He had lacked the courage, the sheer ruthless will that Cale possessed in spades. Indeed, Julian said weakly. He looked at Cale, then back at me, and I saw the moment he truly saw it. Not a hostage, but a partner. A dangerous, powerful, united front. The realization was a blow. He muttered a hasty goodbye and retreated back into the crowd, visibly shaken. Cale watched him go, then turned to me. His gaze was intense, speculative. He hurt you. It wasn't a question. He made a choice, a safe one. There is no safety, Cale said, his voice low. Only the illusion of it, which is more dangerous than any truth. He left you to drown. I pulled you from the water. He paused, his eyes searching mine. Do you miss the safety? The illusion? I looked at Julian's retreating back, at the safe, predictable, small world he represented. A world of quiet disappointments and genteel decay. Then I looked at Cale, at the terrifying, vibrant, brutal reality he offered. A world where I was feared, respected, and powerful. No, I said, and I meant it. The word was a final, definitive break with the person I used to be. I don't miss it at all. Something shifted in his expression then. The usual calculation was gone, replaced by a raw, undisguised heat that stole the air from my lungs. It was the first completely unguarded look he had ever given me. It was possession, yes, but it was also something more profound, something that looked terrifyingly like respect. Good, he said, his voice a rough whisper. His hand slid from my back to my waist, pulling me infinitesimally closer. The contact was electric, a claim that was no longer just for show. Because you were never meant for his world, Alara. You were meant for mine. The rest of the gala passed in a blur. The art, the music, the chatter. It was all background noise to the thunderous realization in my own heart. I had not just adapted to the wolf's den. I had claimed a corner of it as my own. I had faced the ghost of my past and felt nothing but contempt. Kyle had been right. He had given me thorns, and I had just discovered how good it felt to use them. That night, back in the penthouse, the tension that had been building for weeks was a live wire between us. He didn't retreat to his office. He stood with me in the living room, the city lights painting his face in stark relief. You were magnificent tonight, he said, the words a soft caress in the quiet room. I was doing my job, I replied, but my voice was unsteady. It's more than a job now, he said, stepping closer. You know it is. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair from my face. The touch was shockingly intimate, a world away from the possessive gestures for public consumption. I didn't just want a key to a gilded cage, Alara. I wanted the one person brave enough to walk into the lion's den and demand a deal. I wanted your fire. I wanted your strength. His confession was more disarming than any command. He had seen past my desperation to the core of me, and he had coveted it. He had wanted to harness my strength for his own ends. But in doing so, he had awakened a power within me I never knew I possessed. You claimed me as your salvation, I whispered, my heart pounding. And you have become it, he breathed, his face inches from mine. His gaze dropped to my lips. You are the only thing in this world that makes me feel anything other than power. You make me feel... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. He closed the final small distance between us, and his mouth found mine. The kiss was not gentle. It was a conquest and a surrender all at once. It was the crashing together of two violent currents, a release of all the pent-up tension, the anger, the fear, the dark, twisted fascination. It was the seal on our bargain, the final, terrible, beautiful merging of our fates. I didn't pull away. I kissed him back with a ferocity that matched his own, my hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. The last of my resistance shattered. The cage door was open, and I was not running. I was claiming the wolf as my own. When we finally broke apart, breathless, the world had irrevocably changed. He rested his forehead against mine, his breathing as ragged as my own. There is no going back, he stated, his voice raw. I looked into the stormy gray eyes of the man who had destroyed and remade me, and I knew he was right. I know, I said, and for the first time I wasn't afraid. I was his, he was mine, and together we would rule the world he had built, from the shadows to the light. The deal was done. The salvation was complete. The world had a new, sharper focus after that kiss. The colors were brighter, the shadows deeper. The understanding that passed between us was silent and absolute. The pretense was over. The negotiation had ended in a total, shocking merger. I was no longer his liaison or his hostage. I was his consort. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like coming into a birthright I never knew I had. The next morning, there was no awkwardness. There was only a new, profound intensity. When I walked into the dining area, he was waiting. He didn't speak. He looked at me, his gaze a physical touch that stripped away the last vestiges of the woman I had been. He pulled out my chair, a gesture that was no longer about chivalry but about possession. I sat, and his hand rested on my shoulder for a moment, a brand of ownership that sent a thrill down my spine. "The Rossi account," he said, as if we were resuming a business meeting. But his voice was different. It was warmer, laced with an intimacy that was more binding than any contract. "They're hesitating. I want you to handle the final negotiation." It was the first time he had given me a deal of that magnitude on my own. It was a test, but not of my ability. It was a test of my new resolve. "Alone?" I asked, meeting his gaze. "You are never alone," he replied, his meaning clear. My power was an extension of his, and his was now an extension of mine. "But yes, you will sit at the head of the table. They will answer to you." I went to the meeting. The Rossi brothers, two hardened men who had built their empire on brute force, were waiting in the conference room. They were used to dealing with Cale, with his silent, terrifying pressure. They were not prepared for me. I walked in, dressed in a sharp blood-red suit, my hair pulled back in a severe knot. I didn't smile. I took the seat at the head of the table, the one that had always been Cale's. "Gentlemen," I began, my voice calm and steady. "Cale is occupied. You'll be dealing with me." The older brother, Marco, scoffed. "We do business with Marcello, not his assistant." The insult hung in the air. A month ago it would have flustered me. Now it was just a piece of data. I leaned forward, my elbows on the table, my eyes locked on his. "Let me be perfectly clear," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that commanded the room. "The offer on the table is not a negotiation. It is a directive. You will sign over 49% of your shipping lanes. In return, you keep your business and your health. The alternative is that Cale loses his patience with you, and I lose mine." I saw the shock in their eyes. They were seeing the thorns. They were seeing the reflection of Cale's ruthlessness in my gaze. I was no longer the respectable Valeri heiress. I was something new, something they didn't know how to fight. Marco Rossi looked at his brother, then back at me. The bravado had drained from his face, replaced by a wary, calculating fear. He saw the truth. I wasn't just speaking for Cale. I was Cale in this moment. I was the will and the voice of the power that could crush them. He picked up the pen. He signed. I walked out of that room with the signed agreement, my heart not pounding with anxiety, but thrumming with a dark, potent exhilaration. I had wielded his power as my own, and it had felt natural. It had felt right. When I returned to the penthouse and handed Kyle the folder, he didn't open it. He just looked at me, a slow, proud smile spreading across his face. It was a smile I had never seen before, unfiltered, genuine, and fiercely possessive. "I knew it," he said, his voice thick with something that sounded like awe. "I knew the fire in you was not just for show." He reached out, cupping my face, his thumb stroking my cheek. "You are more magnificent than I ever imagined." That night, he didn't come to my room. He led me to his. The main suite was a larger version of the penthouse's aesthetic, all cool tones, sharp lines, and breathtaking views. But it felt different. It felt like his inner sanctum, the heart of the beast, and he was inviting me in. There were no more words. The time for talking was over. What happened between us in that room was a continuation of the kiss, a physical consummation of the pact we had made. It was not gentle or sweet. It was a collision, a claiming, a furious and desperate merging of two people who had been circling each other in a dance of power and submission until the lines blurred into irrelevance. He was ruthless and demanding, and I met him with a wildness I didn't know I possessed. It was a battle and a surrender, and when it was over, lying tangled in his sheets, the city lights painting our skin in silver, I felt more powerful, more seen, than I ever had in my entire life. He lay beside me, his arm draped over my waist, his breathing slowly returning to normal. He turned his head on the pillow, his gray eyes serious in the semi-darkness. "This changes nothing," he said, his voice a low rumble. "And it changes everything." I knew what he meant. The balance of power between us was forever altered. I was no longer just a tool or a salvation. I was his equal, his partner, in business, in bed, in life. "I know," I whispered. He leaned over, pressing a hard, possessive kiss to my lips. "You are mine, Ilara Valeri. Every sharp, beautiful, dangerous part of you." I looked at the man who had torn my life apart and rebuilt it into something more substantial, darker, and infinitely more compelling. The man who had seen the potential for a queen in a desperate girl and had forged her into one. "And you are mine, Kale Marcello," I replied, the words a vow. He smiled, a genuine, devastating smile that reached his eyes. Then the world had better be ready. We fell asleep as the first hints of dawn painted the sky. The wolf and his equal finally united. The deal was done. The salvation was mutual, and our reign was beginning. The world, it turned out, was not ready. But we were. Our union became the city's worst-kept secret and most potent mystery. The society pages, once filled with pitying speculation about my family's fall, now ran breathless features on the Marcello Valeri alliance, a new dynasty forged in fire. They photographed us leaving restaurants, our hands linked, my head held high, his gaze protective and proud. They didn't see the truth, that the protection flowed both ways. That the pride was for the weapon I had become. My family was the final frontier. The dinner was my idea. I needed them to see. I needed them to understand that the daughter they had sent as a sacrificial lamb had not been devoured. She had tamed the beast and now sat at its side. The atmosphere in my parents' dining room was thick with attention. I had carefully orchestrated. The crystal gleamed, the silver shone, but the air was charged with the unspoken. My father was jovial, overflowing with gratitude towards Kale, still seeing him as a benevolent, if intimidating savior. My mother was quieter, her eyes darting between us, sensing the shift she couldn't name. Then Kale arrived. He didn't come as a guest. He came as a king visiting a tributary state. He brought an obscenely expensive bottle of wine and a quiet authority that immediately commanded the room. He held my mother's chair for her, a gesture that made her blush. He discussed the stock market with my father with a sharp intelligence that commanded respect, but it was the way he looked at me that told the real story. It wasn't the look of a man towards his business partner or his social accessory. It was a raw, undisguised possessiveness, a heat that filled the space between us. He didn't touch me unnecessarily, but his attention was a constant physical anchor. When I spoke, the entire table, including my parents, fell silent to listen. It was during dessert that my father, emboldened by wine and good fortune, made his mistake. "Kale, my boy, we can't thank you enough. Ilara has told us how instrumental you've been, but the hard part is over. The business is thriving. Surely she'll be able to step back a bit now, focus on other things." He waved a hand vaguely. meaning a return to an everyday life, to the world I had left behind. The room went still. Cale slowly set down his fork. He didn't look at my father. He looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. "This is your family. You'll be able to handle it." I took a sip of water, buying a moment to let the silence stretch, to allow the weight of my father's presumption to settle. Then I smiled. A calm, polished smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Step back, Papa," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "Why would I do that? The hard part, as you call it, is the only part that matters. Cale and I are just getting started." My father's smile faltered. "But darling, the galas, the meetings, it's no life for you in the long term. You must be exhausted." "I've never felt more alive," I replied, and the truth of it rang in the quiet room. I looked at Kyle, and the connection between us was a visible force. "This is my life now, our life. There is no stepping back." Cale reached under the table and found my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. The gesture was a solid, unbreakable bond, a declaration made without a single word. He raised our joined hands and placed them on the table for my parents to see. "Your daughter," he said, his voice low and final, "is the most valuable asset I have ever acquired, and she is not for sale, nor is she for retirement. She is my partner. In everything." The message was received. My father's face went through a series of emotions. Confusion, dawning understanding, and finally, a stunned, slightly fearful acceptance. He looked from Coyle's implacable face to my resolute one, and he saw it. The balance of power had not just shifted in the city, it had shifted in this very room. I was no longer his daughter to be protected. I was a power in my own right, allied with the most dangerous man he had ever met. Surprisingly, my mother was the one who understood first. She gave me a small, slow smile, one of bittersweet pride. She saw the strength in my posture, the confidence in my eyes. She saw that I was not broken but forged. After that night, the last thread to my old life was severed. I was entirely, completely Cale's, and he was mine. We ruled his empire together from the penthouse that was now our shared fortress. I no longer had a separate room. My clothes hung beside his in his walk-in closet. My book sat on his nightstand. The sterile space had become a home. Our home. A sanctuary of power and passion high above the city we controlled. One night, weeks later, we stood on the terrace, watching a storm roll in over the skyline. The wind whipped my hair around my face, and he stood behind me, his arms wrapped around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. "I went looking for a key," he murmured against my ear, his voice barely audible over the rising wind. "I found a queen instead." I leaned back into his solid strength, watching the lightning fork through the dark clouds. "You didn't find me," I corrected him, turning in his arms to face him. The city lights reflected in his stormy eyes. "You made me." He kissed me then, a deep, claiming kiss as fierce as the approaching storm. When he pulled away, his expression was one of intense, unadulterated triumph. "Then it is the greatest thing I have ever made," he said. The first drops of rain began to fall, cold and sharp. We didn't go inside. We stood there, the wolf and the queen he had forged, watching the storm break over our kingdom. The deal was done. The salvation was complete, and our empire, built on a foundation of a desperate bargain and a ruthless love, was ready for whatever came next. The storm that broke over the city that night was a fitting baptism for our new era. It wasn't an end, but a violent, cleansing beginning. In the weeks that followed, the last vestiges of my old self were washed away, replaced by a sharp, polished certainty. Alara Valeri, the desperate heiress, was a ghost. In her place was Alara Marcello in all but name, a force of nature in her own right, her will intertwined with the city's most feared king. Our partnership became a well-oiled machine of terrifying efficiency. I handled the public face, the mergers, the acquisitions, the delicate political maneuvering with a grace that disarmed our enemies. Cale operated in the shadows, his name a whispered threat that ensured my negotiations always ended favorably. We were two sides of the same blade, and the city learned to fear the cut, whether it came cloaked in my silk or his steel. One afternoon we were in his office, our office now, when Cale received a call. His expression, usually a mask of cool control, darkened. He listened for a moment, then grunted. "I'll handle it." He hung up and looked at me, his gaze grim. "A problem. One of my warehouses is on the docks. The foreman has gotten ambitious. He's been skimming, thinking I wouldn't notice. He's been warned. He didn't listen. This was the part of his world I still found difficult to stomach. The swift, brutal justice. What will you do? He's made an example of himself, Cale said, his voice flat. He will be replaced permanently. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I knew what that meant. A man was going to die for stealing. The old me would have been horrified, pleading for mercy. The new me processed the information. It was the cost of doing business. It was the law of his world. Let me go, I heard myself say. Cale went utterly still. What? The foreman. Let me be the one to deal with him. His eyes narrowed, searching my face for hesitation, for fear. He found none. This isn't a boardroom, Alara. This is not a negotiation. This is an execution. I understand, I said, my voice steady. But sending you or one of your men sends one message. Sending me sends another. It tells everyone that your power is not just in your fist, but in your will, which is now also mine. It tells them that the woman they see at Galus is the same woman who will end them if they cross us. It's a more potent message. I was strategizing a man's death, and I was doing it with a chilling clarity. I was proving once and for all that I was not just his salvation from the world of light, but his equal in the world of dark. Cale stared at me for a long, silent minute. The air in the room was charged, a silent battle of wills. He was witnessing the final transformation, as the last vestige of my old morality was consumed by the ruthless pragmatism he had cultivated in me. Finally, a slow, proud, and profoundly unsettling smile spread across his face. You continue to astonish me. He picked up his phone. Kyle, the woman is coming. Do exactly as she says. He looked back at me. Take Cale with you. He'll drive, and he'll ensure your safety. An hour later, I stood in the same damp, dimly lit warehouse where he had once shown me his true nature. It felt like a lifetime ago. The foreman, a burly man named Marco, was sweating, his bravado gone, replaced by the primal fear of a cornered animal. When he saw me walk in, flanked by Cale, his confusion was palpable. Miss Valerie? What is this? It's not Miss Valerie, I corrected him, my voice echoing softly in the vast space. It's Alara, and this is a lesson. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I laid out the evidence of his theft, my tone as calm as if I were reviewing a quarterly report. I watched as the last of his hope drained away, replaced by the bleak understanding of his fate. You're going to kill me? He whispered, his eyes wide with terror. No, I said, and I saw a flicker of desperate hope in his eyes. I crushed it. Your fate was sealed the moment you decided to steal from Cale Marcello. I am merely here to deliver the verdict, to show you, and everyone who works for us, that there is no distance between his will and mine, that the hand that holds the pen at the charity gala is the same hand that signs your death warrant. I looked at Cale, who stood silently by the door, his expression unreadable. I gave a single, slight nod. Kyle didn't hesitate. He drew his weapon. The shot was a single, sharp crack that reverberated through the warehouse. Marco slumped to the floor. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I watched the life leave his eyes, my heart a steady, cold drum in my chest. I had ordered my first execution. I had taken a life to cement my power, to prove my loyalty, to solidify my place. It was the final step, the point of no return. Cale walked over to me, his footsteps loud in the sudden silence. He didn't speak. He looked down at Marco's body, then back at me. There was no judgment in his eyes, only a profound, terrifying respect. He offered me his arm. I took it, my hand steady. We walked out of the warehouse together, leaving the darkness and the death behind, stepping back into the afternoon light. In the car, he was silent for a long time. Then he reached over and took my hand, his grip firm. You are my equal in every way that matters, he said, his voice low and fervent. There is no one else. There will never be anyone else. I looked out the window at the city passing by. My city. Our city. I had entered the wolf's den for a deal. I had been claimed as his salvation. And in the end, I had not been saved from the darkness. I had embraced it. I had become the wolf's queen. And as the car carried us back to our fortress in the sky, I knew, with a cold, unshakable certainty, that I would not have had it any other way. The story of the desperate girl was over. The legend of the king and his queen had just begun. The silence in the car was not empty. It was full. It was the heavy, resonant quiet that follows a vow, a sacrament, or a killing. Cale's hand on mine was not a comfort. It was a seal. The warmth of his skin was a stark contrast to the cold finality of what we had just left in the warehouse. I had crossed the last moral frontier. and the landscape on the other side was both desolate and liberating. There were no more lines. There was only us and the empire we ruled. We returned to the penthouse, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of fire and blood. The usual sterile air of the place felt different now. It wasn't a cage or a fortress anymore. It was a throne room, and the blood I had just spilled was part of its foundation. I walked to the bar and poured 2 glasses of whiskey, my hands rock steady. I handed one to Cale. He took it, his eyes never leaving my face. He was studying me, looking for cracks, for regret. He found none. He saw only the calm, hardened resolve that mirrored his own. "To us," I said, my voice clear and firm. A slow, genuine smile, one that transformed his entire face, broke through his usual severity. He clinked his glass against mine. "To us." We drank. The whiskey burned a path of certainty down my throat. That night, in the dark of his bedroom, our lovemaking was different. It was no longer a collision of 2 opposing forces, but a synchronized dance of predators. It was fierce and consuming, a physical affirmation of the dark union we had cemented that afternoon. There was a new understanding in his touch, a reverence for the queen he had fully unleashed, and in my response, there was a claiming, an acceptance of the power and the price that came with being his. Afterward, lying in the tangled sheets, he traced the line of my jaw with his finger. "I have a meeting tomorrow," he said, his voice a low rumble in the dark. "In Sicily, the heads of the other families. They are concerned. Our rise has been too swift. Our methods are too public. They see you as a destabilizing influence." I propped myself up on an elbow, looking down at him. This was it. The final test. The old world, the one he came from, was pushing back against the new world we were building. "What will you tell them?" "I will tell them nothing," he said, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "You will come with me. You will stand beside me. You will look each of those old men in the eye, and you will show them exactly what kind of influence you are." A thrill, sharp and dangerous, shot through me. This was more than a business trip. It was a coronation. He was presenting me to the most powerful, most dangerous men in his world, not as his companion, but as his equal. The meeting was held in an ancient, sun-baked villa overlooking the Mediterranean. The air was thick, with the scent of lemon trees, and a tension that could be cut with a knife. 5 men, each with the weight of generations of violence in their eyes, sat around a stone table. They were the old guard, their power built on tradition, secrecy, and brute force. Cale and I were the revolution. We walked in together. I wore a simple, severe white dress, a deliberate contrast to the men's dark suits. I was a statement. I was the light they feared, and the darkness they didn't understand. The introductions were curt, the stares hostile. Don Falcone, the eldest, a man with a face like a wrinkled hawk, spoke first, his voice gravelly with age and disdain. "Cale, we welcome you. But the presence of a woman, this is not our way." Cale didn't sit. He stood behind my chair, his hands resting on my shoulders. An explicit physical declaration. "The world changes, Don Falcone. Our ways must change with it. This is Alara, my partner. You will speak to her with the same respect you afford me." The air crackled. I met Don Falcone's gaze, my own unwavering. "Don Falcone," I said, my voice calm and carrying. "Cale and I appreciate your concern, but stability is not found in clinging to the past. It is found in controlling the future. Our methods, my methods, have brought more wealth and more legitimate influence to our organization in 6 months than in the previous 6 years. We are not destabilizing the old ways. We are building new ones on top of them." I spoke for 20 minutes. I laid out our financials, our political connections, and our strategy for the next decade. I used their language but framed it through my perspective. I showed them how my legitimacy was a weapon more potent than any of their enforcers. I showed them that I was not a weakness, but their greatest strength. When I finished, there was a long, heavy silence. The men looked from me to Cale and back again. They saw the unshakable unity. They saw the future, and it was us. Don Falcone leaned back, a grudging respect in his eyes. "Perhaps," he conceded, "there is room for a new way." It was all the blessing we would get, and it was everything. On the flight home, Cale was quiet. He stared out the window at the clouds below. Then he turned to me, his expression more open and vulnerable than I had ever seen it. "All my life," he said quietly, "I have built walls. I built them with money, with fear, with blood. I thought they made me strong." He reached out, his hand cupping my cheek. You walked through every single one of them. You didn't break them down, you just belonged on the other side. Tears pricked my eyes, not of sadness, but of a profound, terrifying understanding. We were two halves of a whole, a perfect, dangerous symmetry. The deal, I whispered, remembering the desperate girl in his office. You claimed me as your salvation. And you, he said, his thumb stroking my cheek. You saved me from the emptiness of my own power. You are my salvation, Ilara, in every possible way. He leaned over and kissed me. A slow, deep, claiming kiss that tasted of destiny and a love that was as brutal and beautiful as we were. We landed as the sun was setting, returning to our city, our kingdom. As we stepped out of the private jet, he took my hand, his grip firm and sure. Ready? He asked, his eyes on the glittering skyline. I looked at the city, at the man beside me, at the queen I had become. I had sent to the wolf's den for a deal, and I had found my destiny. I was born ready, I said. And together we walked into our future, the Mafia boss and the salvation he claimed, ready to reign forever. The city skyline was no longer just a view. It was a living, breathing testament to our union. Every light represented a business we influenced, a life touched by the shadow of our combined will. The flight back from Sicily had been the final seal. We were no longer just Kale and Ilara. We were an institution. The old wolves had bowed their heads, not in submission, but in acknowledgement of a new, superior predator. Life settled into a rhythm of terrifying power and profound intimacy. The boardrooms and the bedrooms were just different arenas for the same dance. We were ruthless in business and fierce in our private moments. The line between the two so blurred it ceased to exist. One evening we were reviewing security protocols for a new data center, a wholly legitimate enterprise that served as both a revenue stream and a fortress for his digital empire. The encryption needs to be military grade, Kale stated, his finger tapping the blueprint. I don't trust the government contractors. We'll use our own people. Agreed, I said, making a note on my tablet. But we should also leak a vulnerability to a controlled rival. Let them waste their resources attacking a decoy. He looked up, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face. Devious. I like it. He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. Have I told you today that you are the most perfect creature I have ever known? The shift from strategic coldness to fervent admiration was seamless. It was our language. Not since this morning, I replied, a matching smile touching my lips. Later, as we prepared for a tedious but necessary opera fundraiser, he came into my dressing room. I was fastening a diamond necklace, the stones cold against my skin. He stood behind me, our eyes meeting in the mirror. He didn't offer to help. He watched, his gaze a physical caress. Sometimes, he said, his voice quiet, I look at you, and I forget to breathe. I forget the millions, the weapons, the men who want me dead. All I see is you, the first and only thing in my life that was ever worth claiming. The raw honesty in his words still had the power to undo me. He was a man built on control, and with me, he willingly let it shatter. I turned and faced him. You didn't just claim me, Kale. You rebuilt me. You saw the pieces of a broken heiress, and you forged a queen. He kissed me then, a deep, lingering kiss that promised a night that would extend far beyond the opera's final act. Then my greatest creation is also my greatest weakness, he murmured against my lips. And your greatest strength, I corrected. The fundraiser was a triumph. We were royalty and the city knew it. But the actual test of our reign came from an unexpected quarter. My brother Leo, the one whose debt had first bloodied my hands. He had been quiet, living off the generous allowance I provided, but the recklessness that was inherent to him had not been cured. He had started talking, bragging in the wrong circles about his powerful sister and her infamous husband. He was a loose thread, and in our world, loose threads got people killed. Kale told me about it one morning, his tone carefully neutral. He's becoming a liability. Ilara. His name is being linked to ours in places it shouldn't be. It draws attention, the wrong kind. I felt a cold dread, but it was different from the fear I'd once known. This was the cold calculation of a ruler assessing a threat to her kingdom. Leo was my blood, but he was also a danger to everything we had built. To the man I loved, I'll handle it, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Kale searched my face, looking for the conflict. The sisterly love that might override logic. He found only resolution. He gave a single sharp nod. As you wish. I summoned Leo to the penthouse. He arrived, arrogant and oblivious, expecting another handout. He didn't see the queen on the throne. He still saw his big sister. Ilara, to what do I owe the pleasure? Need me to charm some old fool at a party? He flopped onto the sofa, grinning. I remained standing, looking down at him. Your talking has become a problem, Leo. You're using our name as a toy. It is not a toy. It is a weapon, and you are waving it around in the dark, threatening to cut yourself and everyone around you. His smile faded. What are you talking about? I'm just having a little fun. People are finally respecting me because of you. Respect? I let out a cold, sharp laugh. They don't respect you. They are using you to get to me. To get to Kale. You are a doorway, Leo. An unlocked one. And I cannot have that. The arrogance in his face finally crumbled, replaced by a dawning fear. He was beginning to see the woman I had become. Ilara, what are you going to do? I walked to the desk and picked up a prepared envelope. Inside was a one-way ticket to Switzerland, and the deed to a small, isolated chalet. There was also a bank statement, for an account with more than enough money for him to live comfortably for the rest of his life, provided he never left that valley. You are going to disappear, I said, my voice flat and final. You will take this, you will go to this address, and you will never speak our names again. You will not contact our parents. You will not contact me. You will vanish. He stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. You're exiling me? Your own brother? I am saving your life, I corrected him, every word a shard of ice. The alternative is that Kale handles the liability, and he is not as sentimental as I am. The blood drained from his face. He finally fully understood. The sister who had saved him from Rostov was gone. In her place was a queen who would sacrifice her own blood to protect her throne. He took the envelope, his hand trembling. I'm your brother, he whispered, a last desperate plea. And I am his wife, I replied, the words a vow and a verdict. Now get out. I watched him leave, my heart a block of stone in my chest. There was no grief. There was only the quiet, grim satisfaction of a necessary amputation. The kingdom was secure. When I told Kale what I had done, he didn't speak. He crossed the room, pulled me into his arms, and held me. He understood the cost. He knew the weight of the crown I wore. I am sorry, he murmured into my hair. Don't be, I said, my voice muffled against his chest. There is no room for regret in our world. Only power and love. He held me tighter. And we have both. In abundance. We stood there, in the heart of our empire, two flawed, brutal people who had found their missing piece in each other. The deal was done. The salvation was complete. The story that began with a desperate girl walking into a wolf's den had ended with a queen and her king, ruling together forever.